Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's been a little bit. I've been working on a couple projects and that's kept me pretty busy. But today I wanted to talk about a project that I shot for Gibson guitars featuring Rex Brown of Pantera and his signature bass. So let's take a look at it.
I've been coming to New Mexico since I was a child. This is what I call God's country, or whoever your God is. My grandmother, she played the piano for the silent movies. She had a little piano sitting in the hallway, and I would just watch her left hand, and those were the bass notes. There's a solid low-end presence to these basses. If you sit in front of a couple of Ampegs and listen to it, it's just low-end for days, and it sustains. For a beginner starting out, it's hard enough to wrap your hands around a bass just to hit a note anyway.
There was a lot going on in this video. We shot this in northern New Mexico in a place called Abiquiu, which is about an hour north of the state capital in Santa Fe. We shot this at a location called Ghost Ranch, which is where the famous painter Georgia O'Keeffe lived and worked for many years. So the location has a lot of really rich history. It's been used in a lot of different movies, and it's just such a really cool location. Some really great scenery and landscape throughout there. So that was one of the big parts of this job, was trying to capture a lot of that landscape and just kind of highlight the beauty of the Southwest. I grew up in Santa Fe, so I'm pretty familiar with that landscape and with the area. Worked on a couple of projects that I've shot up in Ghost Ranch in the past, so it was nice to kind of go back for this job. So let's get into the schedule for this. This was a travel job, so I was traveling from LA to New Mexico. We shot this over the course of a single day, and we had 1 day for travel, 1 day for a pre-light, prep, and location scout, our shoot day, and finally our travel back. So on the first day we traveled from LA to New Mexico, where we picked up some local gear and drove that up to our hotel in Abiquiu where we'd be staying. So we did a pre-light day on that first day with the Grip and Electric team, so we could dial in kind of our broad strokes for the lighting for the interview that we'd be doing first thing in the morning the following day. From there, after we did our pre-light, while the camera team was prepping the cameras, the department heads for Grip Electric and myself, as well as the director and producer, went out and scouted a couple of locations for the music video performance. Then the following day came our shoot. We started with the interview segment, then moved into some product B-roll, a little bit of landscape B-roll that was happening simultaneously, and then finally on to our music video performance. That was going to be sort of the heaviest part of our day from a camera perspective as well. And we'll get into that a little bit further into the video. Our last day, we drove back from Abiquiu, returned some of our local gear, and headed back to LA. So let's get into the cameras that we shot this on. This was going to be kind of a complex job from the camera perspective, as we not only had to shoot the interview with 4 cameras, we had to reconfigure 2 of the cameras for the music video performance segment into different builds. We needed to have 2 cameras on sticks, one that was going to be built on a Ronin as a remote head, and the 4th camera body was going to be built for steadicam. So we would have some steadicam working throughout the performance, as well as our jib and our 2 stationary cameras that were on tripods. So there was a lot of moving parts to this video. That meant that our camera department needed to prep the cameras in advance so that 2 of them could kind of go off and be stripped down into the various modes they would need to be for Steadicam and for the gimbal, where the other 2 could stay more in a studio style setup with all the gear attached to it. So I was really grateful to have that pre-light day so they could kind of work out the kinks of, what needed to go on which camera and how to balance the camera for the gimbal and everything like that. We shot this video on Canon C500mkIIs with my set of Leica R lenses. We also carried a Tokina 16 to 28mm zoom and a Laowa 24mm probe lens that we'd be using for some extreme macro close-ups for the guitar product work. The zoom lens was kind of a new lens for me. I hadn't used it before. It's a really versatile, lightweight zoom that covers a nice range for those sort of wider focal lengths. And being able to keep that zoom on the camera for jib work made it much faster, so we didn't have to swap lenses over to get new sizes and rebalance the gimbal on the jib. Really saved us a lot of time to have that flexibility with our shot sizes. Pretty impressed with the quality of it. Even though it's a modern lens, it still has a lot of nice character to it and some interesting flares. And part of the reason I chose to shoot this on my Leica R lenses was because they cover full frame. They're already converted for EF mount, so I didn't need to get any specialty mount or adapters for the C500s. And I just love the character from them. They've got really nice flares. They've got beautiful qualities in color rendition, as well as kind of a nice softness to them, since they are all 70s vintage lenses. And being Leica, they are still very sharp despite their age. So when it comes to location scouting for this, we weren't able to do any sort of location scouting in person beforehand. I had some knowledge of the location when I had shot there on a couple of jobs when I worked and lived in New Mexico, but a lot of the areas that we were going to be shooting in specifically I hadn't been to or seen. The location manager sent us photos of a couple of options that we had to choose from for the interview location. And after going through them with the director, we pared it down to kind of one main room that we would be looking at. We had also gotten a couple of photos for different areas that we might want to look at for the music video location. But those we would have to kind of look at in person and see what it was going to take logistically to get gear back into that area and set up our jib. And, that sort of thing you really can't do just remotely. You can have a certain idea of what it might be like, but for certain areas and different factors in your shoot, you really have to have a chance to scout it in person so you can be best prepared for that. So that's why we set aside time on our pre-light day to scout those locations, to take a look at them with our key grip and gaffer so that we knew exactly what we would need to run power out to the location, as well as any sort of gear we might need to bring to get our grip package and our jib out there. We did ultimately find a really great location to shoot not only some beautiful landscape B-roll, but made for a great location to shoot the music video segments as well. So as I mentioned, the location manager sent us some photo options for the interview locations. The first location we're going to look at is called the Longhouse. And this is actually ultimately where we ended up shooting, but let's take a look at it. It's, pretty unimpressive from the outside, not a lot of interesting character to it. These red doors here are kind of like garage doors. They can open up if we needed to. You can see here on the inside, you've got this really interesting architecture and some nice symmetry that you can work with, and a lot of natural light that we'd be able to work with and block off as needed. I really like this location because of all the dark wood colors and just interesting texture in the background here. And seeing these windows that we would be able to light from and motivate some of our lighting from was a big plus. This section option that the location manager sent us was a location called Casa del Sol. While it had some really interesting architecture and beautiful landscapes in the background, there just wasn't enough character to it for me. I knew that it was going to be a challenge to shoot this interview if we were going to be needing to see outside much, just with the changing light and having to factor that in for kind of a longer run for the interview. So that was definitely a big factor. I was trying to figure out, what we would need to balance out the exposure on the outside as well as the inside if we wanted to try and hold both of those. And the inside of this place wasn't very interesting. We have these white walls everywhere. And while there is some beautiful background, again, it becomes balancing out those levels between your inside exposure and your outside exposure, and maintaining kind of a consistency in your lighting across a longer interview segment. You may even be doing an hour and a half interview and cutting that down. And so your light is going to change outside throughout that period and just become unpredictable. So, I like to try and maintain as much control as I can during any sort of interview setup. And overall, it didn't really fit the gritty, dusty Western kind of vibe we were going for, that, the artist kind of was specifically trying to highlight kind of the beauty of the Southwest and call back to some of that Western imagery that you see in these classic Western movies. But yeah, so the Casa del Sol, like, while it had some interesting character and it might have worked out for us, I just didn't think it was as interesting visually. And the director agreed with me. We both talked about it, and we decided to shoot at the Longhouse location. It had the most character and would just give us the most control lighting wise. So one of the first things I like to do is kind of check the sun path for the location. And with the location being kind of off in the remote desert, you're not able to just put an address into Google Maps. So I had to get GPS coordinates from our location manager for that specific location. So one of the apps I use all the time for kind of location scouting remotely is called Helios Pro. Helios is great. You can put in GPS coordinates and it'll give you a exact location for that, as well as the sun path for any certain time of year. And it'll do that all on a map overlay. So you'll be able to look at it, from a satellite map view and see, where the sun is going to be at any time of year, any time of day. I find the map function on Helios Pro to be really invaluable, especially for location scouting remotely, when you're not able to kind of go there in person and take out Sunseeker and see exactly where the sun's going to be, on the day there. Another tool I really like to use, in particular when I'm doing location scouting remotely, is Google Earth as opposed to Google Maps. It just allows you to use a couple more tools that aren't available in Google Maps. I was really trying to get a sense of just how big the structure was we'd be shooting in, so that I could take that information and recreate it roughly in my favorite Pre-Vis program, Satellite, which I've talked about in almost every breakdown video that I've done in the past. What I used was Google Earth, and I used their measuring tool to get a sense of just how large the space was. And I used that information to create my 3D mock-up in Satellite, referencing the location scout photos and Helios to get a sense of what the building might look like. One of the drawbacks that I do run into with Satellite, however, is not being able to do kind of volumetric lighting. And I knew that we wanted to add some haze into the background of this location. I'd love to see them implement, the ability to add haze or, some sort of volumetric feature into their lighting fixtures, so you could kind of preview what that might look like. So after creating the mock-up of the location in Satellite, I sent that over to my gaffer and my key grip so they could get an understanding of kind of the general look we were going for in advance and build out their lighting and grip rental list from there. One thing I like to do when I'm working on a job that has budget for, a dedicated key grip and gaffer is I'll send my Pre-Vis imagery to them so that they can build out their grip and electric lists using fixtures that they think will get me the best result based off the Pre-Vis imagery that I've sent them. My general lighting plan for this, was kind of a big soft 3/4 key light, an edge light for the hair, a harder light on the subject, and we wanted to have some shafts of light coming through the windows in the background to add a little bit more depth and some visual interest, creating a little bit more of an environment that's, not just your stock standard kind of interview background. So we wanted to make it feel a little bit more like a movie and a little less like your typical talking head interview piece. So that was kind of the general approach for my lighting. So now we'll get into scouting for the music video segment. The music video was going to be the most logistically challenging part of the whole shoot. Not only because we had a company move after our interview setup, we needed to have 5 different camera setups to accomplish before the sun set. So we were racing against the sun, as well as trying to get all these different angles. We needed to have 2 takes of the performance on a crane on a remote head, 2 takes of the performance on sticks, 2 takes of the performance with just steadicam, a B-roll sequence for the intro that was all on steadicam, as well as 2 takes of the performance using a drone. The other logistical piece we had to think about with this was because we were shooting on a crane, we needed to have a large number of grips to help move it, set it up, and operate it. At least 4 people to just kind of get the crane out there. We shot this on a GF8 crane, which is a modular crane. So that means you can make it longer or shorter, but it's a static crane. It's not like a techno crane where you can have the length vary. So this was a static 30-foot jib that we ended up shooting with. One thing that we're a little bit concerned about was shooting in New Mexico in the spring. It's really windy. So the wind was going to be a limiting factor in just how far out we could build the crane and have it, be safely operated. Fortunately, when we were shooting, it wasn't, the highest winds during that day, which was really lucky. So we were able to, build out our crane to be a little bit longer at a 30-foot length, as opposed to, I think the alternate plan was like a 10-foot or 15-foot that could be operated safely, depending on the wind levels. So fortunately, we were able to get a longer run for our crane, which allowed us to have higher angle shots and a little bit more versatility as far as the arc we could achieve when swinging out the crane. Back to our location scouting for this. We looked at a couple of different outdoor locations that our location manager sent us. We kind of narrowed it down to two different options. The first one being Box Canyon, and the second one being Ladron, which, both had some really interesting landscape and, some really cool looks to them. Our first option here was Box Canyon. After a bit of a drive out to the location, we made it to the canyon, where we were greeted by an absolutely massive cliff face on one end and a large expansive valley in the other direction. On paper, it seemed really ideal. It was really close to our interview location, so it meant our company move would be shorter. You'll look at this map here and you'll see that it's much closer to Ladron, which is, only about a quarter mile away or so. One of the first things we looked at was the road to get there had a long stretch of very soft sand, which would pose a big problem for getting our crane out to set, just given the weight of it. My key grip told me it would take them about an hour or more just to get the crane out there to that location, and that was going to really slow down our pace on our company move. But you can see the landscapes here are really gorgeous at this Box Canyon. You've got this beautiful wall, which would have made a great backdrop to set Rex against when he was playing the bass. You had this kind of hard-packed dirt road that we could have used as the base for our crane. But while this landscape is absolutely stunning, it did turn out to be not the best location for us. So after talking with the director and my keys about the locations and logistics of getting out there, we opted to look at another location. Here you can see the sun path for Box Canyon. This was from Helios as well. One other really cool feature of Helios that you can do is called 3D landscape. And this is fantastic when you're shooting in these locations that, you need to know what the shadows are going to do based off the landscape you're shooting in. And it creates these 3D maps that will highlight the shadows that are cast when the sun is at different angles. So you can really get a sense for, whether or not your background is going to be in deep shadow or it's going to cause shadows in your foreground that you don't want. It's just a really fantastic tool for being able to check, what your sun path is going to do in various ways, whether that's these 3D maps, your satellite maps, or your typical, way that you sort of use Sunseeker, where you look at it, in person through the camera. That's just one of the things I really like about using Helios, especially when I'm doing location scouting remotely. Again, this isn't sponsored by them or anything, but it's just an app that I use all the time, and I think it's really fantastic. So while it is a little bit of an expensive purchase initially, it has really paid for itself immensely on these location scouts that I have to do remotely. So let's take a look now at our second option for the music video location that we were going to look at. This is Ladron. With where this location was at, it really gives you a big sense of scale to how vast the landscape is out here. Here you can see my key grip and gaffer talking through some of the shots and logistics with the Ladron rock structure in the background here. Here we are kind of location scouting, climbing over the rocks. I really like these photos as they give you a sense of the scale of some of these rock formations here. We ultimately really liked this location that was off to kind of the side here at Ladron. You have this beautiful kind of plateau that looks out into this valley. You can see the mesas in the background, which are these, beautiful rock formations, these red rocks that are jutting out the background here. So initially, when we were looking at this location on Google Maps, it was much further away. It was about a 15-20 minute drive from our interview location. And it didn't really seem to make sense to me that we would shoot there because it was just so far away and kind of off the main ranch property. So we would have to leave the main property, go down the road, find this kind of dirt road that wasn't marked, then take that up to the location. So it was definitely a little bit tricky to get to. But to my surprise, it was only about 15-20 minutes off the road. And the road was this hard packed dirt. We didn't have to worry about that big sandy wash we were dealing with at the Box Canyon location. So it meant that we would have a much easier time getting our crane there, getting our crew there. And it gave us, nearby spots for crew parking, as well as grip electric staging, and a place to kind of build our camera package for steadicam and remote head. And it gave us a place to place our generators that were a little bit further away for the music video performance. So after we finished scouting, my key grip and gaffer and I talked to the production about needing some extra grips to get the crane out there and get it set up quicker. Initially we had only budgeted for my gaffer, my key grip, and I think one swing, for our whole grip and electric department. But after they talked with the producers about, just the logistical needs for getting the crane out there and, being able to work faster, they were able to get them to budget in a couple of extra grips for that day for our manpower. So having those extra grips was going to be really helpful for wrapping out our location for the interview and moving our gear and crane out to the music video area we'd be shooting at. So their experience and ability to effectively communicate their needs as far as manpower was fantastic. It made a massive impact on how quickly and efficiently we were able to move from the interview location to this second base camp. So to maximize our time on the pre-light and location scout day, we decided to shoot some product B-roll of the guitar. We brought some cameras, lenses on a tripod just to have with us, to capture some B-roll during our scout so we could be ready whenever we saw kind of a cool location or, caught the light in an interesting way. Doing this not only allowed for us to have some additional footage for the editor to use, but it gave me the opportunity to revisit the Ladron location, later in the day when we were actually going to be shooting the music video, so I could get a real sense for how the light was going to interact at that location and what we might need to bring with us on our shoot day as far as, bounces or any other sort of grip equipment we might need. So here's the schedule breakdown for our shoot day. You can see we have a lot that we packed into a single day here. So even with all our prep work, we ran into an issue with our talent's availability on our shoot day. So he was not available to come in for the interview for at least an hour. With how we lit this location, it didn't change our plan very much because we did our pre-light the day before. So that wasn't going to be a huge issue. It just meant that our timing was going to be a little bit tighter for the music video segment. So finally the shoot day was here. We were pre-lit. I only needed to make a couple of little tweaks once Rex got to set, just based on, making adjustments for his height and sitting position and his wardrobe. Here you can see the mock-up frame versus our final frame here. This was, I think, pretty accurate to what it ended up being. You can see the mock-up frame. The framing is just a little bit different. The windows are in different spots. But overall, I think it's a pretty accurate build out for just, a Pre-Vis mock-up look. So here you can see the final lighting layout we used for the interview segment. We ended up scratching the hair light as there just wasn't room for it, in the wide shot. And I think that ended up working out fine. We had a lot of nice contrast, without that. Our basic lighting setup was we had our key light, which was two Cream Source Vortex 8s pushing through an 8x8 of half grid. Our edge light was an Arri M40. And in the background, we had two Aperture 600Ds with Fresnels at full power. And finally, we had a DF50 hazer in the background for a little bit of environmental haze. So one of the other challenges that we ran into was keeping the level of our haze consistent throughout the interview. You can see, some shots here where the haze level is a little different. We shot this interview over the course of 45 minutes, and our ideal haze level only lasted about 10-15 minutes. Once we got going. So we had to kind of take some breaks throughout the interview to pump up the haze level and kind of waft it around and get it filled in. But that did lead to some areas and segments in the interview where the haze isn't entirely consistent. Part of the issue was the fact that the building wasn't very well sealed. It had these big garage door openings that had these, big gaps underneath them, which would allow the haze to come out and dissipate pretty quickly. So it meant that we had to be pretty on top of, trying to keep that hazer going and keep it kind of refreshed throughout the day. It was a lot to ask from one small haze unit, but I think, overall we managed to get it looking pretty good. One thing I may have done differently was to use either a bigger hazer or, maybe even just scrapped the haze entirely and only used it for specialty shots, some kind of B-roll shots or artist profile shots. But here you can see in this 135, our key light hitting that far side key, and our M40 is getting this beautiful hair light on the edge. I do kind of wish we wrapped the key around a little bit more onto his near side here, got a little bit more of a Rembrandt light, but we did catch a little bit of that in his near side eye here. You can see our ideal haze level has a lot less contrast in the background and lifts those shadows a little bit more, whereas Here, there's a lot less haze, which gave it a lot more contrast in the image overall, which is still a really nice look, but not entirely what we were going for. So there are 4 skylight windows in the ceiling, windows on both sides of Talent, and we wanted to use the door on the far right to light from, providing an edge light to block out as much ambient light in the room as possible. So to do so, we covered 2 of the skylights closest to the Talent with Duvetine, and blocked out the far left window, which isn't seen in frame, with a 4x4 floppy. So we killed basically all the light on the far left side of frame. So let's go through our camera angles here. We have our A camera, which is the 24mm locked off on sticks. We have our B camera, which is the 50mm on a 4-foot slider doing a push-in. Our C camera is a 35mm on a Dana dolly going side to side. And our D camera is locked off on sticks on a 135mm. So all the cameras were set at a T2.8, except for our B camera, which was set to a T4 because it was going to be doing sort of a push-in on our slider. So we just adjusted our ISO to that camera in particular. So one of the hiccups we ran into on our prep day was learning that none of our tripod heads that we rented fit the Mitchell plate of our slider. Even with our Mitchell to 100mm ball adapter, the tie down on our tripod heads was too long to clear the support brackets on the slider. So we weren't able to use any of our tripod heads on our slider. And what we ended up doing was we set the camera on a sandbag on the slider and just used that as sort of our base, and had our operator holding the camera the entire time so it wasn't going to fall off, throughout the shot. Because this was just going to be a strict push in and pull out angle, we didn't need to do any sort of panning or tilting. We set the frame for that to be ideal in just sort of a locked off position. So with our interview done, it was time to move into the music video performance. So the first order of business once we got to Ladron was getting our crane in place. Our location manager provided us with a 4x4 Kubota, which is sort of an off-road ATV style vehicle that our grips were able to use to transport segments of the crane, as well as tow the base with. So we chose to shoot the music video segment on this cliffside that was looking over this beautiful valley of rock and mountain in the background here. This location gave us a lot of depth throughout the video segment. The key grip and I went over to the cliffside and found the most level spot for the base of our crane to land. From there, the grips went ahead and started the process of getting it built. While that was happening, my first AC and one of the camera operators helped build the camera for the Ronin. We had to add a couple of different weights on the back of the camera just to help balance out the lens. So this was going to be kind of a heavy build for our camera on this. My focus puller used a Light Ranger, which is a focus assist system, as well as some wireless video so we could be monitoring the camera while it's on the crane, and we'd be able to use that wireless transmission for our Steadicam as well. Rex's crew brought 3 massive amps to the set as well to use as playback for Rex while he was playing the song. One other piece of gear that I brought with me was a Revar Cine 4x5 polarizing filter, and that was really to help kind of bring out the blues in the sky, as well as kind of minimize any reflections that we might catch on the base. So initially I thought we were going to need to build out 2 cameras, and have 2 different wireless follow focus systems for the Steadicam and for the Ronin, but it ended up being quicker to just build 1 camera body and swap that from the Steadicam over to the Ronin, as those weren't going to be playing simultaneously. One piece of gear that I brought with me that was invaluable was a set of headsets. For these I used EarTechs, which were the set that I owned at the time, and these were really helpful for being able to quickly communicate to my camera operators as well as the jib operator. So I would be able to tell the camera operator, okay, we're going to pan left here, tilt down on this angle, and tell the jib operator, okay, we're going to swing the jib to the right, we're going to boom up here, we're going to boom down, that sort of thing. So being able to quickly communicate that without having to, yell across set, it was really helpful and I think really important to be able to do. In terms of lighting for the music video performance, we didn't really have to do much. I had talked with my key grip and gaffer about bringing out a 6x6 or an 8x8 ultra bounce for this, but it ended up being a little bit too cumbersome with the winds. We tried one take where we didn't have any sort of supplemental lighting, but it ended up being a little bit too dark. So I just brought in a 4x4 bounce that I had my key grip holding and kind of following along with the camera and the performer throughout the piece. It ended up working out really well, and that's the only piece of lighting we needed for this whole music video piece. While we were capturing the performance on the jib, we also had our B camera operator setting up on a long lens to get a couple of different angles as well. Using the jib was fantastic as it gave us a lot of variation in shots. So I shot the majority of this music video at a pretty deep stop as I wanted to be able to see into the background more and get a lot more of the environment. It also gave my focus puller a little bit of an easier time, given that the jib was going to be making these long swinging movements and getting really close to Rex as well throughout the piece. After we wrapped a couple of passes with the crane, we moved over to steadicam. Our steadicam operator was on standby to help our first AC move from the Ronin over to steadicam, and while they were building the steadicam, our grips moved the crane out to allow for more space for camera movement for the steadicam operator. We also needed to clear out that space for our pass of the song we were going to do with the drone. So while they were building steadicam and the crane was being broken down, we shot a couple of different angles on sticks that were just locked off. Once we got a couple of passes of the song just on sticks, we set up for a couple of passes on steadicam. Since the crane was a fixed length, it didn't allow for us to get a lot of shots moving in and out, and we wanted to have dynamic movement. So having the steadicam as another option was fantastic, which allowed us to get a lot more dynamic shots and different movement that we weren't able to achieve with the jib. After a few passes at regular speed, we did a couple passes at 60 frames, which then wrapped out our Steadicam segment. And with the sun in a even more dramatic location, we then shot some extra B-roll of the intro for the piece at that slower 60 frames per second. We got a couple of shots of Rex walking through the desert with his bass, which was something that we really wanted to capture, these sort of epic landscapes with Rex walking in the foreground here. This was sort of him walking over to the area he would be performing the music video at. So with all those shots done, that was the wrap on our day. It was a whirlwind of a day, to say the least. But all that was left to do was sort out our gear and return it to the rental house the next day and fly back to LA. A little while after wrapping the shoot, it was decided that they needed to add a little bit more controlled product B-roll. So one of the other cinematographers at Gibson, Patrick, who was with me on the Jimmy Page shoot, shot the studio B-roll for the bass here. I talked with him a little bit about what his lighting setup was. So what he did was he says he hung a couple of big panels of Duvetine in the background, and he had a Leica kind of in between them for that backlight, and they had a suction cup mount on the back of the guitar that they mounted to a C-stand so that they could manipulate the guitar without having to have it on a guitar stand that was going to leave it in a fixed position. He keyed the guitar with a aperture in a light dome, and he used a couple of V-flat bounces to add some reflections and separate the bass from the background. All right, that does it for this breakdown, guys. Thank you again so much for watching. I appreciate all the comments and feedback I've gotten so far. If you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more breakdowns coming up. We'll see you in the next one.